I want to walk you through the process of creating this portrait. This is a drawing in charcoal. The main materials I'm using here are willow charcoal, a charcoal pencil, soft hardness. I have a brush and a small cloth for blending, a kneaded eraser, also some mechanical erasers. So initially I'm creating a rough sketch using a piece of willow charcoal, just quickly finding the composition and some of the main structures of the face, working quickly and loosely. And in this case, I'm working from a photo. And, whether you're working from a photo or from life, really always remembering to keep your eyes moving. You don't want to get stuck on the subject for too long. You don't want to get stuck obsessing on the drawing for too long. Really keeping it fluid, keeping your hand moving, keeping your eyes moving back and forth. And, the wonderful thing about charcoal is that it's so easy to work in and out additively and subtractively. Willow charcoal is such a nice, soft, easily blendable and erasable material. So you can really sort of let yourself go and work loosely and have fun. So in the second stage, layering the charcoal on a little more heavily. Again, just using willow charcoal, starting to establish areas of shadow and highlight. And then using my brush and cloth to blend the charcoal. Lightly layering and blending willow charcoal is a great way to create a soft ground and mid-tone for the drawing. And then from there, working back in, starting to establish a little more detail, using the eyes as an anchor point for the composition. This is still mainly just using willow charcoal and a little bit of charcoal pencil. Also playing with the mechanical eraser. And then going a little further with the detail. Really at this point working with shapes of light, so trying to find where there's shadow, where there's highlight, and also layering. So, starting to layer the eraser marks over the charcoal marks. I'm working with the brush quite a bit to blend the charcoal and also using the kneaded eraser to work in and out of the drawing. So with charcoal, again, always working additively and subtractively, going back and forth, building up layers, and this really creates a lot of texture and an interesting sort of history in the drawing that comes through. To me, it's really the sort of layers of mark and texture that begin to make it really interesting. And you can also see here finding some of these main areas of highlight along the bridge of the nose and along the cheek. And then working with the shape of the hair a little more specifically. In this portrait, there's a really interesting way the hair is falling over the face and this light and shadow play that starts to happen. So I'm starting to find that contrast, adding a couple more of the rough areas of highlight to the lips and to the chin. I find working with portraits, it can be very difficult to not get a little bit obsessive in the features of the face and to kind of get too drawn into the details too quickly. I always like to keep myself moving. If I find that I'm maybe getting a little too obsessed trying to get the eye or the nose just right, just pulling yourself away, working on another part of the drawing for a moment, really making sure you're looking at the whole, because it's really the relationships of the shapes that make it compelling and interesting and that are going to help you be accurate. If you're going for more of a realistic sort of proportionate representation, you really need to just be paying attention to how the different shapes of the face relate to each other, keeping yourself continuously evaluating the whole. So now I'm working out more of the shape of the overall head, the hair, playing a little bit more with finding where light is falling, using the kneaded eraser to work subtractively. You can almost think of drawing light. You're sculpting light with your eraser and with your stick of charcoal, particularly when you're working subtractively, and just finding those areas with the eraser that where light falls across the hair, where it falls across the face. And again, layering, really letting the history of the drawing show up. To me, it really makes the image more compelling and rich. And at this point, I want to play a little bit more. I'm really curious in just what I can do texturally to make this a little more interesting. So I'm going to come in with some acetone. So this is acetone paint thinner. You can get it at most hardware stores, and I put it in a sturdy spray bottle. It does have a bit of a fume, so make sure you're in a space that's well ventilated. If you're using it for a while or have sensitive skin, maybe wear gloves. Before spraying on the drawing, you want to prepare the surface. So you get the most interesting effects when there are layers of material for the acetone to interact with. So charcoal powder sprinkled or brushed onto the drawing. Don't brush it all away. Leave some little piles. Also heavy marks with willow charcoal. Compressed charcoal doesn't work as well, but you can play with it. Play with the angle of the surface. So in this case it was vertical, so the acetone sort of can run down the page. Play with a light spray versus a heavier spray that pools or drips. On this piece, I'm using both, so some light sprays in areas and then some areas where I just let it really pool and drip down. So also play with masking. In this case, I took a piece of paper that I had torn off and used that, held it up as I sprayed to block the spray from getting on certain parts of the drawing, for instance, not letting too much get on the face. This can be a really effective way to shape the technique. So it dries fairly quickly. In this case, I waited for it to dry and then went back in with more layers of charcoal. You can also go back in with the eraser. You can blend it with a brush or a cloth. So you can really find some fun, interesting textures, and this kind of gives this it's a little bit of mystery of exactly what you're going to get. I also find this technique helpful in keeping the drawing from becoming too precious. You're really kind of willing to really work subtractively, sort of wipe out a lot of what you've done and really trust the process, and then going back in and again layering warm mark on top of this. So then in the final stages, going in and working back on top of what I did with the acetone, and I really worked to kind of keep that that line, that subtle line of the shoulder, just to sort of anchor the piece so it wasn't just a floating head. Revisiting some of the hair, trying to establish more of the overall structure of the head just by how the hair is falling. You can quickly capture the shape and feel of hair by looking at how chunks of hair move and fall around the head. As I was learning to draw, I often tried drawing individual strands of hair or getting too caught in the details. But you can squint slightly to soften your gaze and look for the major shapes. You'll often see chunks or pieces that move together and overlap. Observe the light as it hits these. And just like earlier, use some willow charcoal and blending to create a midtone, then work with pencil and kneaded eraser to capture the shapes and the light. And then the mechanical eraser can be really nice for just capturing a few of the light falling on individual strands of hair. So those were some of the major steps and techniques I used for this portrait. I probably spent 2.5 to 3.5 hours total working on this. I hope this inspires you to get out some charcoal and get messy and have some fun drawing portraits.